So they're telling me to replace x with 2. So 5, 2 to the third minus 3. Alright. I'll go ahead and take care of that. Get your final answer done in your warm-up. You can pause this until you're ready to move on. Next thing I'm going to do is review a couple things. If I have x plus 5 squared, that of course means x plus 5 times x plus 5. And then we're going to FOIL. So first is x squared. Outside and inside is 5x and 5x. So that's 10x. And on the end we got 5 times 5, which is 25. Same thing here. So I have x minus 4, x minus 4. So as we move our way over, we're going to get x squared. I have negative 4 and negative 4 is negative 8x. And then on the end, negative 4 times negative 4 is plus 16. Now we call these perfect square trinomials because they come from a binomial that is being squared. So we want to be able to use this information. So if we see one of these perfect square trinomials, we can write the whole thing backwards. So how in the world can I get an idea of how to just identify this value so that I can make perfect square trinomials? So we need to take a close look at what's happening from 10 to 25. And make sure that same rule takes me from negative 8 to 16. Subtle hint here, we're talking about completing the square. Completing the square. So if I have the number 10, well if I square 10 it's 100, so I don't want all of 10. So how much of 10 do I want to square to get 25? Will that rule work here as well? I don't want negative 8 squared. Negative 8 squared is 64. That's way too much. How much of 8 do I want to square to get that 16? Well, if you're thinking that you want the b value, half of it, and then square it to give you that value on the end, you're exactly right. So I want to take b, whatever it is, half of it, and square it. So quick review here. So 10, half of it, and squared. Well, that's 5 squared, and that's 25. If I take negative 8, half of it, and square it, half of negative 8 is negative 4. Negative 4 squared is 16. Alright, so we've come up with a first rule on how to complete a perfect square trinomial. So again, I want 2, I want half of it, and then square it. So that would be 1 squared, which is 1. So 1, this is now a perfect square trinomial. By filling in the constant, we're saying what value goes here to make this a perfect square trinomial. Well, here's what we do every time. We take half of the b value, and the sign goes with it. So negative 6 and squared, so 36. This value is 36. And even if it's not even, we can do the same thing. So 3 halves, and if I have to square it, remember our rules, is I have to square the top and square the bottom. So 9/4. So how's this useful? You're saying, okay, you gave me a new equation, you told me to fill in this constant, which is the new c value, and you told me many, many times that these are all perfect square trinomials now. But when am I ever going to use this? How am I going to use it? Why should I use it? Here's one reason. We have a couple rules to follow here. I want to get x squared and x on one side. So minus 8x minus 8x. I want x squared minus 8x plus blank. Alright, once we have x squared and x on one side, we're going to leave the space in here because I want to make this side into a perfect square trinomial. So we go through the same thing. Negative 8, I want half of that and then square it. So half of that is negative 4, so that's squared. So that's 16. Got ahead of myself there. So we're going to add 16. But you and I and everybody else knows that I can't just add 16 unless I do that to both sides. Now it looks a little bit funny, but over here, this is all set up. So I'm going to use this number before I squared it. So x minus 4 squared. That would give me this perfect square trinomial. Over here I have negative 36 plus 16. Alright, so I have negative 20. the rest of what we're going to do to try and solve this is take the square root of both sides. So I have x minus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 20. After that, we're going to add 4 to both sides. So x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 20. Completing the square allows us to solve problems that we can't factor and that we can't do anything else with. So to recap, what's the first thing out of all these things we have here? What's the first thing we have to do? Is the first thing I'm going to do to solve? Probably not. That's probably the last thing I have to do is solve. We want to write as a binomial square. We want to complete the square. We want to have x and y on one side, or x and x squared on one side. That sounds familiar. Okay. Then I completed the square after that. So that means I'm using b over 2 and squaring it. That value we're going to have to add to both sides. We're going to write it as a binomial squared and then solve. So this is our solid method. So first thing I want to do, second, third, fourth, and solve. Alright, a couple notes that we want to make is I need to have a to be 1 and b, we would really like it to be even for any of these type of problems. If I don't have that, we're going to learn how to use the quadratic formula, and then we would use the quadratic formula. But we have x squared minus 4x, x squared minus 4x plus blank equals negative 8 plus, I know I'm going to have to add whatever goes in here to both sides. So negative 4, half, and then we're going to square that. So that's negative 2 squared is 4. So we're going to add 4 to both sides. Reason is, I want to write a perfect square trinomial. So I can write x minus 2 squared. Remember, I'm always going to use this value before I square it to create the binomial squared. This is now equal to negative 4. So x minus 2, if I take the square root of both sides, is equal to plus or minus negative square root 4. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 4. That's what x equals. Alright, now we just talked about, I want to make sure that a is equal to 1. That must be as part of my first couple of steps. So, when I look at this whole problem, I have 2x squared minus 14x plus blank. I'm going to get rid of the 10 by subtracting 10. So, let's move that guy over. So it's negative 10 plus 2 is negative 8. Next thing I have to do is make a 1. So I'm going to divide everything that I have and make it x squared minus 7x plus blank equals negative 4. Now I can begin to solve. So negative 7, half of that, and square it. So I now have 49 over 4. 49 over 4. So plus 49 over 4. Next thing I want to do is write it as a binomial squared. We can clean this. Let's get a common denominator. So 4, so this is negative 16 fourths plus 49 over 4. If we clean up that side, we're going to have, so we have 33 fourths, and we're going to take the square root of both sides. So if we extend our page now, we'll have x minus 7 over 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 33 over 4. Make sure that's all underneath. So we're going to add 7 halves and add 7 halves. So x equals 7/2 plus or minus the square root of 33 over 4. Now keep in mind that some of these problems could come out a little bit nicer, but I want to make sure that as we do problems together, you see how to handle some things that are a little tricky. I have some problems that I want you to write the answers to in your notes. So what would you use to complete the square, and what would the binomial squared look like? If you did half of 14 to get 7 and squared it to get 49, then you did it right. X plus 7 is the binomial square. Good job. What are you going to use this time? 64. Excellent. What's the binomial? X minus 8. Find the term that must be added to both sides of the equation so the equation can be solved by the method of completing the square. So you're focused in right now on the b value. Let's give you some choices. Well, what's half of 30? Half of 30 is 15. Is 15 my answer? No. 15 is one of the choices, but it's not my answer. What's my answer? Dun, 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 dun. There you go. See, it is 225. Find the term that must be added to both sides so the quadratic equation can be solved by completing the square. Well, here's the b value. What are we going to add to both sides? Choices are? You didn't need choices, did you? It's 25. We want to solve by completing the square. So remember, there's a couple things we need. We need everything divided by 6, because the a value must be 1. So x squared plus 3x plus 2 equals 0. I need x and x squared on one side. X squared plus 3x plus blank equals negative 2 plus blank. We're going to take the b value, split it in half, and square it. That's 9/4. This is 9/4. I can now write it as x plus 3/2 squared equals, here I'm going to have 9/4. This 2 is over 1. So if I need a common denominator of 4, I have to multiply by 4 on the top and bottom. This is negative 8 over 4. Negative 8 plus 9 is 1. X plus 3/2 squared equals 1/4. This one's pretty simple now. If I want to take the square root of a fraction, I take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. So square root of 1 is 1, square root of 4 is 2. It should still be plus or minus. Subtract 3/2 to both sides. X equals negative 3/2 plus 1/2, and x equals negative 3/2 minus 1/2. Negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2 over 2. Answers are negative 1, and negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4 over 2. So that's negative 2. Negative 2 and negative 1 are your solutions. What we could have noticed from the very beginning is signs should be the same, both positive. Factors of 2 that add up to 3 are 2 and 1. So we did this kind of the long way around, but I want to make sure that you understand we can do this at any time, even if we have to work through a fraction. So obviously we want a to be 1. We would prefer b to be even. If it's not, we can still do it. Let's try it again. So let's first divide everything by 3. X squared plus 5x plus 4 equals 0. Would this be factorable? Are there factors of 4 that add up to 5? Sure, but for the sake of practicing by complete the square, let's go ahead and finish it out anyway. X squared plus 5x plus blank equals negative 4 plus blank. 5 halves squared equals 25 fourths. We want to add 25 fourths to both sides. X squared, whoop, x plus 5 halves squared equals, now if I have negative 16 over 4 plus 25 over 4, we have 9 over 4, and that's equal to our binomial squared. Let's take the square root of both sides. So notice what always happens on the left is I get just the binomial, because the square root and the square cancel each other out. This would be plus or minus 3 halves. The square root of 9 is 3, square root of 4 is 2. Subtract 5 halves and subtract 5 halves. So we now have x equal to negative 5 halves plus 3 halves. We also have the answer, negative 5 halves minus 3 halves. Negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. And negative 5 minus 3 is negative 8 over 2, which is negative 4. But you knew that from the beginning. The factors of 4 that add up to 5 are 4 and 1. You knew the signs were to be the same and they were both going to be positive. So when we go to solve, we would get the opposite, negative 1 and negative 4. Alright. Is this one that we would want to try complete the square with? First thing I'd have to do is divide by 8. X squared minus 3/4 x minus 7/4 equals 0. Does this look like something you want to do? Or would you want to factor it and see, or at least see if it is factorable? So I do see a greatest common factor of 2. 4x squared minus 3x minus 7 equals 0. Do we have factors of 28? Let's subtract to 3. Alright, we're left with a couple of choices. Now, you have a bunch of tools in your toolbox as far as how you solve problems. First thing is, you could just guess and check until you're blind in the face. We can try and complete the square, in which we're going to take, negative 3/4, half of it and square it. So that's negative 3/8 and square it to get 9/64. Or we can really think about, do we have factors of 7 times 4, 28, that subtract to give me 3, because I know the signs are going to be different. I'm going to have minus and then plus. Well, think about that again. What did we multiply? 7 and 4. And I know what you're thinking. Right now you're saying, but you just told us, we're supposed to learn how to complete the square. You are. I want you to learn how to do it. But I don't want you to forget what you already know. And I don't want you to use things that you don't have to. So 4x minus 7, 1x plus 1 equals 0. Let's get some solutions. 4x minus 7 equals 0. 4x equals 7, x equals 7/4. And on the latter side, x plus 1 equals 0, so x equals negative 1. Point is, as you do your homework, no matter when it is, whenever we're dealing with quadratics, you're learning multiple ways to do that. Use the best one. Only you can be the judge of what's the best one. See ya.